My mom shamed my boyfriend for being cheap, then found out he was a secret millionaire. My mother has one guiding principle, a North Star that has dictated every major decision in her life and every piece of advice she has ever given me: marry rich. It's a philosophy she espouses with the fervor of a televangelist, a gospel of financial security above all else. Her dream for me has never been about love or happiness, not really. It's been about me finding a man so wealthy that he could not only fund my life of leisure, but also bankroll her own comfortable retirement. It's a crass, transactional view of marriage that has been a source of quiet, simmering conflict between us for my entire adult life. So, when I met my boyfriend, Tom, last year, a man who comes from a family whose name is synonymous with old money and quiet philanthropy, you would assume my mother would have been ecstatic. You would be wrong. She despises him. Because for the past year, my mother has been completely and utterly oblivious to the fact that Tom is a secret millionaire. Tom is a man at war with his own wealth. He hates the assumptions, the sycophants, and the suffocating expectations that come with his last name. So, he has constructed a life for himself that is a deliberate and defiant act of rebellion against his own privilege. He works a standard 9 to 5 IT job at a tech company, a position he is wildly overqualified for but genuinely enjoys. He only ever accesses the vast, sprawling trust fund his great-grandfather established for big-time emergencies, a category that, for him, seems to mostly include bailing out friends and making anonymous, substantial donations to causes he believes in. His entire aesthetic is a carefully curated performance of normalcy. He wears faded, comfortable clothes sourced exclusively from thrift stores. His hair is a perpetually unruly mop that he rarely bothers to comb. And his car is a 10-year-old, slightly dented sedan that has seen better days. To the untrained eye, he looks less like a millionaire and more like a struggling graduate student who is one missed rent payment away from homelessness. And, funnily enough, this is precisely why I fell in love with him. He is the most genuine, down-to-earth, and unassuming person I have ever met, a man completely unburdened by the ego and entitlement that so often accompanies great wealth. My mother, however, saw him through a very different and far more judgmental lens. The first time she met him, at a casual family barbecue, her reaction was a masterclass in thinly veiled disgust. She pulled me aside into the kitchen, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. "A junkie, Amelia?" she hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper. "You're bringing a junkie to meet your family?" I tried to explain that I loved him, that he was kind and smart and funny, that his appearance had no bearing on his character. But she just scoffed, her eyes raking over his worn-out band t-shirt and ripped jeans with a withering disdain. "Our family has an image to maintain," she declared, as if we were the Kennedys and not a middle-class family from the suburbs. "We cannot have someone so low-class, dragging us down." Her initial strategy was a frontal assault. She pestered me relentlessly to break up with him, her phone calls a constant barrage of criticism and dire warnings about my future. When it became clear that I was not going to be swayed by her lectures, she changed tactics. She decided that if she couldn't convince me to leave him, she would make his life so miserable that he would leave me. Her campaign of psychological warfare was both petty and relentless. At family gatherings, she would loudly and pointedly refer to him as my homeless boyfriend, her voice dripping with a condescending pity that made my blood boil. When she would take family photos, she would conspicuously angle the camera to cut him out of the frame, a literal and metaphorical erasure of his presence. And to this day, she has steadfastly refused to invite him for a family dinner, her excuse always the same: "I simply will not cook for people like him." Through it all, Tom has been a rock of stoic, almost amused, patience. "Why don't you just tell her?" I'd ask him in moments of frustration, after another of my mother's particularly vicious snipes. "Why don't you just show her your bank statement and shut her up for good?" He would just shake his head, a sad, knowing smile on his face. "Because your mother," he'd say, his voice gentle but firm, "has an ugly, black, and rotten heart when it comes to money. If she knew the truth, she wouldn't stop." The insults would just be replaced by demands. And, trust me, that would be 1,000 times worse than what we're dealing with now. He was right, of course. I knew he was right. I just didn't realize how right he was until last weekend, when my mother's carefully constructed world of social climbing and superficiality collided head-on with the reality of Tom's secret life. My mother, in her eternal quest for social validation, is on the board of a small, local charity that raises money for stray dogs. It sounds noble, I know, but her involvement is purely performative. She hasn't donated a single dime of her own money in the last year. Her primary role is to organize their annual fundraising gala, an event she treats with the pomp and circumstance of the Met Gala. It's her chance to network, to see and be seen, to bask in the reflected glory of her supposed philanthropy. This year's event was held at an absurdly fancy downtown hotel, the kind of place with crystal chandeliers and an army of valets. When Tom and I arrived, dressed in our respective versions of formal wear, me in a simple but elegant black dress, him in a thrift store suit that was surprisingly well-fitting but still undeniably secondhand, I saw my mother's face tighten with a familiar, frustrated rage. She marched over to us, her smile a tight, angry slit, and immediately began whisper yelling at me. "How could you?" she hissed, her voice a low, venomous buzz. "How could you bring this beggar to my event? You have disgraced this entire family bringing human waste into a place like this." She didn't wait for a response. She snapped her fingers, summoning a burly security guard, and, with a dismissive wave of her hand, instructed him to escort us out. I tried to protest, my face burning with a mixture of shame and fury, but my mother was an immovable wall of self-righteous indignation. "If you ever bring your hobo boyfriend to one of my events again," she said, her voice a cold, final threat, "I will not hesitate to cut you out of my life completely." Heads were turning, our small, ugly drama becoming a spectacle for the city's elite. I could feel their curious, judgmental gazes on us as the security guard, with an apologetic but firm grip on Tom's arm, led us toward the exit. It was in that moment, as we were being publicly humiliated, that I saw a look on Tom's face that I had never seen before. It wasn't embarrassment or sadness. It was a cold, hard, and genuinely angry resolve. The laid-back, easygoing man I loved had been pushed too far. He apologized to me, his voice a low, tight growl, and then he pulled out his phone and made a call. A few minutes later, as we were standing on the curb, waiting for the valet to bring our dented sedan around, the same security guard came rushing out, his face a mask of flustered embarrassment. "Sir, please," he said, his voice a nervous stammer. "There's been a misunderstanding. The event coordinator would like you to come back inside." When we walked back into the ballroom, the atmosphere had changed completely. The room was silent. Every single guest, including my mother, was staring at Tom with a mixture of shock and awe. My mother's face was a fascinating, mottled shade of beet red. The event coordinator, a woman who had been studiously avoiding my mother's gaze just moments before, was now on the stage, a microphone in her hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice ringing with a newfound enthusiasm, "we have a very special, last-minute announcement. I would like to invite our top donor of the year, a man whose incredible generosity has just secured our new shelter wing, to say a few words." And then she said his name. Tom's full, very recognizable, and very, very wealthy name. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place in my mind with a dizzying speed. Tom, in that moment of pure, unadulterated rage on the curb, had called his accountant. He had instructed him to make an immediate, anonymous in-name-only donation of $10,000 to the charity. He knew, with the cynical certainty of a man who has spent his entire life navigating the world of performative philanthropy, that a donation of that size, to a small, local charity like this one, would make instantaneous waves. And he knew that as the year's top donor, he would be given a platform. He walked onto that stage, the ill-fitting thrift store suit suddenly looking like a deliberate, ironic statement. He took the microphone, his expression a perfect, unreadable mask of polite humility. And then he began to speak. "Thank you," he said, his voice calm and clear, resonating through the silent room. "I'm not much of a public speaker, but I just want to say a few words about why I chose to support this wonderful organization." He paused, his eyes sweeping the room before landing, with a deliberate, pointed intensity on my mother, who looked as if she was about to faint. "The real reason I'm up here," he continued, his voice taking on a new, more personal tone, "is to talk a little bit about one of your board members. A woman whose passion and dedication to this cause is truly inspiring." The entire room turned to look at my mother, who was now visibly trembling, her legs looking as if they might give out from under her. She managed to conjure a weak, terrified, and utterly fake smile. She had no idea what was coming, but she knew it was going to be bad. And then, Tom, my brilliant, beautiful, and now terrifyingly vengeful boyfriend, did something I never would have expected. He didn't expose her. He didn't humiliate her. He did something far more cruel, far more effective. He sang her praises. He launched into a soaring, magnificent, and entirely fictional tribute to my mother's kindness, her generosity of spirit, her unwavering compassion. He lied, with a masterful and convincing sincerity, about how she had welcomed him into her family with open arms, how she had looked past his humble appearance and seen the goodness in his heart. By the time he was finished, my mother, the woman who had just referred to him as human waste, was being hailed as a saint, a paragon of non-judgmental virtue. The room erupted in applause. And then, for the final, brutal masterstroke, he invited her up on stage for a photo, a picture. He announced that he would be so proud to post online to celebrate her incredible spirit. Watching my mother's soul die in real time, as she was forced to stand on that stage, her arm linked with the man she had just tried to have thrown out, a rictus of a smile plastered on her face for the cameras, was a moment of pure, unadulterated, and priceless schadenfreude. The rest of the evening was a surreal, almost comical, performance of my mother's breathtaking hypocrisy. The moment the applause died down and the flashbulbs stopped popping, she descended upon us, her demeanor having undergone a complete and instantaneous transformation. The cold, judgmental harpy was gone, replaced by a warm, gushing, and terrifyingly enthusiastic woman who acted as if Tom was her long-lost, favorite son. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of her earlier behavior. Her first question to him, delivered with a bright, avaricious gleam in her eye, was a blunt, "So, how much money do you actually have?" Tom, to his credit, didn't even blink. He just smiled, a cool, knowing smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Enough," he said, his voice a low, almost playful purr. "For you to start acting like you're my best friend." The subtlety of the jab, the sheer, delicious irony of it, was completely lost on her. She took his words not as an insult, but as a confirmation, a starting gun for her own gold-digging marathon. I don't even think she registered that he was making fun of her. Her personality shifted into a super fake, overly friendly gear, and she began to parade him around the ballroom, introducing him to all her socialite friends as "my daughter's wonderful boyfriend from the distinguished Thompson family," as if she hadn't just an hour prior been trying to have him ejected for being a beggar. By the end of the night, she was practically hanging off his arm, snapping a relentless stream of selfies with him to post on her social media, her captions a nauseating litany of praise for the special young man she had always known was a keeper. It was an Oscar-worthy performance of fakeness, and Tom, a far better actor than I ever would have guessed, played along with a polite, but visibly strained, grace. I could see the vein in his forehead, the one that always pulsed when he was truly, deeply angry but trying to maintain his composure, throbbing like a metronome all night. We finally managed to escape around midnight, after 3 excruciating hours of my mother's cloying, sycophantic attention. In the car on the way home, the silence was thick with a shared, unspoken fury. Tom gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white, his jaw clenched so tight, I could see the muscles twitching. The easygoing, laid-back man I loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who was radiating a cold, hard rage. He dropped me off at my apartment, and when I asked if he wanted to come up for coffee to talk about what had just happened, he just shook his head. He needed space, he said, to process the evening. I was left alone in my quiet apartment, the events of the night replaying in my mind on a relentless, dizzying loop. I barely slept, my dreams a chaotic and disturbing mashup of my mother, in a wedding dress, trying to marry Tom herself. The next morning, at a truly ungodly 7 a.m., my mother called. Her voice was a chipper, sing-song melody that was completely alien. "Good morning, sunshine. I was just thinking, wouldn't it be lovely for your successful boyfriend and me to have brunch today?" The fake enthusiasm was so thick, I could have gagged. I had literally never heard her use that tone in my entire life. I knew exactly what she was after, but I found myself reluctantly agreeing to set up a meeting, a decision born more of a morbid curiosity than any real desire to facilitate their bonding. I immediately called Tom to warn him. He sounded tired, but not surprised. We quickly devised a strategy, a plan to handle her inevitable and no doubt intrusive, money-related questions. When Tom arrived to pick me up, I was surprised to see him in a pair of what looked like designer jeans and a crisp, expensive-looking button-down shirt. "Sometimes," he said with a wink, "you have to dress for the role you're playing." But there were still subtle tells of his usual, understated style, a small, deliberate coffee stain on his cuff, a detail I am certain was an intentional piece of camouflage. My mother, it turned out, had brought backup. My Aunt Madison, her sister, and a woman who was essentially my mother's clone but with harsher highlights and an even more judgmental personality, was waiting with her at the upscale restaurant she had chosen. The brunch was an ambush, a 2-on-1 interrogation disguised as a social outing. My mother greeted Tom with a massive, cloying hug, loudly calling him her future son-in-law, her eyes shamelessly darting to his wrist, trying to assess the value of his watch. Tom, a master of this game, kept his cuff strategically pulled down, hiding the Patek Philippe he'd absent-mindedly put on that morning. The meal was a relentless barrage of probing, upper-class dog whistles. "So, Tom, where did your family summer as a child? Which boarding schools did your parents consider for you?" Tom, with a smooth, practiced ease, deflected every question, answering vaguely about his IT job and his modest downtown apartment, a property he conveniently failed to mention he owned the entire floor of. The most outrageous moment came when my mother accidentally spilled a glass of red wine all over Tom's expensive shirt, a move so obviously telegraphed I almost laughed out loud. She was clearly hoping for an angry, revealing reaction. Instead, Tom just handled it with a quiet, unruffled grace that seemed to infuriate her even more. As we were leaving, my mother whispered to me, not realizing Tom was right behind us, "Don't worry, honey. I will get to the bottom of his finances." Tom just gave me a knowing, weary look over her head. The next day, she showed up at my apartment unannounced, a flimsy excuse about being in the neighborhood, and a plate of store-bought cookies in her hand. She was there to snoop. I caught her in my bathroom, going through the drawer where Tom kept a few of his things, her fingers literally examining the tags on his spare socks. When she thought I wasn't looking, she tried to snatch a business card from his investment advisor off my counter. The woman's desperation was escalating, and so were her tactics. A week later, she called me, her voice a hysterical, sobbing mess. She had been unfairly fired from her administrative job. She was going to be homeless. It was a dramatic and entirely fabricated crisis designed to elicit a financial rescue. Tom, ever the strategist, offered not money, but help with her resume. He even connected her with a friend of his who was a head of recruiting at a major corporation. My mother, her disappointment palpable, reluctantly agreed, but then promptly skipped the interview his friend had arranged, claiming a last-minute panic attack. Her next move was to suggest that a relaxing vacation might help clear her head, a hint so unsubtle it was almost comical. When that failed, she pivoted again, asking if Tom could invest a small inheritance she had suddenly remembered she had. Tom, his patience clearly wearing thin, gently explained that his own finances were tied up and suggested some practical budgeting strategies. Her frustration was becoming a palpable, crackling energy in the room. In a move of stunning desperation, she then began a full-scale digital investigation, methodically contacting Tom's friends on social media under the guise of planning a surprise party for him. That backfired spectacularly when one of his old college friends, a woman named Ava, who was oblivious to our little drama, innocently commented on one of my mother's sad, down on my luck posts. "Hang in there. Tom is one of the most generous people I know. Remember when he paid for everyone's villa after our yacht docked in Santorini?" The breadcrumb trail of Tom's real life was now out there, and my mother began to follow it with the single-minded focus of a bloodhound. She even managed to get Tom's father's business number and called, pretending to be from a charity called Hearts and Paws, fishing for information about the family's philanthropic activities. Tom's father, a shrewd and seasoned veteran in the war against gold diggers, saw through her immediately. He set a trap, mentioning a fictitious, exclusive charity gala and giving her a real address, which was, of course, their home. The night of the gala, my mother arrived, dressed to the nines, to find not a glittering ballroom, but an intimate dinner party. Tom's parents were gracious hosts, but they expertly and ruthlessly deflected my mother's every attempt to steer the conversation toward money. The evening culminated in Tom finally, and with a weary resignation, revealing the full extent of his wealth. My mother, faced with the undeniable truth, immediately pivoted to a gushing, apologetic sycophant, her focus shifting from investigation to ingratiation. She started talking about wedding venues before Tom had even proposed. The final confrontation came a week later. Tom, having had enough of her games, invited her to dinner at his real home, a stunning penthouse apartment that screamed, old money. He had arranged for his driver to pick her up, and on the ride over, she had apparently interrogated the poor man about the cost of the car. When she arrived, she was initially stunned into silence by the sheer, understated opulence of the apartment, but she quickly recovered, her eyes darting around, her mind clearly calculating the value of everything she saw. Tom, his patience finally exhausted, laid all his cards on the table. He calmly explained that he had always been wealthy, but chose to live simply because he valued authenticity over materialism. He then announced that while he was planning to propose to me, he could not and would not do so until the toxic family dynamics surrounding her obsession with his finances were addressed. He told her in no uncertain terms that marriage for him meant creating a new, healthy family unit with firm boundaries, and that he would not tolerate financial manipulation or emotional blackmail from his in-laws. He then did something I never expected. He proposed that the three of us attend family therapy together, making it a non-negotiable condition for any future engagement. My mother, predictably, rejected the idea as unnecessary and insulting. The evening ended in a tense, cold silence. In the weeks that followed, my mother alternated between tearful, guilt-tripping texts and a stubborn, angry silence. She even showed up at my workplace, attempting to ambush me into taking her side. But Tom and I held firm. The therapy was the only path forward. Finally, after 2 weeks of a complete stalemate, my mother, in a move of what I can only assume was pure, calculated desperation, agreed to one session. The session was a revelation. Under the gentle but firm guidance of the therapist, a woman named Dr. Gold, my mother finally, tearfully, admitted the truth. Her obsession with money was rooted in a deep, traumatic childhood fear of poverty. Her own parents had lost everything in a financial crisis, and she had spent her entire adult life terrified of returning to that state of insecurity. For the first time, I saw not a gold digger, but a scared, wounded woman. It wasn't an excuse, but it was an explanation. It was a start. We attended 5 more sessions. My mother, slowly and painfully, began to unpack her issues. Tom, with a compassion I wouldn't have thought possible, offered not to fund her lavish lifestyle, but to help her achieve genuine financial security, setting up a retirement fund and connecting her with a financial literacy counselor. Last weekend, during a simple picnic in the park, Tom proposed. The ring was a beautiful, understated vintage piece, a symbol of our shared values, not his bank account. My mother, when I showed it to her, had a fleeting moment of disappointment at its modest size, a flicker of her old self, but it was quickly replaced by a genuine, tearful happiness for me. She is learning. We are all learning. The path forward is not a straight line, but for the first time, it feels like a path we are all, in our own broken way, walking together.